Number 9. Skeleton and thigh-high leather boots. It's sadly not uncommon for human remains to be discovered in London's River Thames, where an estimated few dozen people tragically lose their lives every year. But it's unusual to come across extremely old remains, like the 500-year-old skeleton of a male in thigh-high leather boots that archaeologists discovered in 2018 ahead of a tunnel building project. Estimated to be 35 or younger when he died during the 15th or 16th century, the man was found face down in the mud at Bermondsey near the Tower of London. One arm rested above his head while the other was bent unnaturally at his side. His teeth bore evidence of some type of repeated action, such as passing a rope between them, indicating that he may have been a fisherman, a sailor, or a scavenger searching for buried valuables along the muddy riverbank. His boots were well made and would have been expensive, which also suggests that he made a living along the river. The man's bones bore no evidence of trauma, leading experts to believe he may have fallen or drowned before quickly being buried in sediment. There were signs of wear and tear on his skeleton, which likely means that he worked hard from a young age and that his job took a toll on his body. Number 8. Trio of Roman-era boats. In 2020, coal miners working along a tributary of the Danube River in Serbia discovered a trio of ancient boats that are believed to date back to the Roman era. They were found near the former Roman city and provincial capital of Viminacium, which was home to a squadron of warships. The largest among the trio of newly discovered boats was a flat-bottomed 49-foot-long vessel that appeared to be built using Roman techniques. It consisted of a single deck and at least 6 pairs of oars, and was likely crewed by 30 to 35 sailors. Evidence of repairs to the hull indicate that it was used extensively. The other 2 boats were dugout longboats or monoxyles that were used by ancient Slavic groups. They were much smaller and simpler than the Roman boat, and may have been used by warriors who paddled them across the Danube on their way to attack the Romans. The boats were in remarkable condition for their age, thanks to the silt and clay that they were buried in, which shielded them from exposure to oxygen. At the time of the discovery, archaeologists conceded that the vessels may date back to the Byzantine or medieval periods, but that all signs point toward them being from Roman times, including the lack of any known port cities in the area after Viminacium fell to enemy forces during the 7th century. There are no historical records of any battles occurring near the discovery site, although there were some skirmishes further up the river. And while the Roman boat shows no signs of being destroyed in combat, it's possible that a confrontation occurred and simply wasn't mentioned in ancient documents. Unfortunately, there's little to go on in terms of determining what the boat was used for. The lack of artifacts found on board suggests that it was abandoned rather than destroyed in a disaster, and that it may have been deliberately sunk to prevent it from falling into enemy hands. Number 7. The Newport Ship. During the construction of a theater along the River Usk in Wales in 2002, archaeologists discovered an astonishingly intact 500-year-old wooden shipwreck. Experts determined that the 116-foot-long vessel was built with trees that were felled in the Basque region of northern Spain around 1449, a time when the region's shipbuilding industry was bustling. They also found newer timber and signs of repairs that trace back to England around the year 1466. By medieval standards, the so-called Newport Ship was a great ship that would have traveled great distances throughout the Atlantic and Mediterranean. To experts, the location of the wreck posed the obvious question of why and how it ended up docked in a small port city with a population of just 500. Evidence suggested that the ship was slated for repair but was abandoned when the supports under its starboard side collapsed. There were initially no plans to raise it after its rediscovery more than 550 years later, but locals wanted to see the ship saved. They formed the Friends of the Newport Ship Foundation and led an extensive effort to fund the recovery effort. The Newport City Council and the Welsh Assembly government eventually managed to scrape up the 7-figure sum. Not surprisingly, the vessel was in poor shape despite being in good condition for its age. With only part of its hull intact, it's essentially in pieces. In early 2023, archaeologists announced that they were finally almost finished excavating, preserving, and recording the ship's timbers and artifacts. The next step will be to try putting it back together and determining the best way to display it to the public. Number 6. An ancient Roman port. In 2021, archaeologists discovered a trove of artifacts in England's River Wear near the city of Sunderland. Included among the finds were 5 stone anchors, 4 of which were made from locally sourced stone, nails, a stone map, sharpening tools, a brooch, and some Roman coins. The types of anchors that were uncovered are typically found in the sea and had only been found in a river environment in England once before. Underwater archaeologist Gary Bankhead told BBC News that the anchors found at Sunderland each had a single hole. They resemble a stone anchor that was found in Dorset alongside some Mediterranean pottery dating back to sometime between 100 BC and 100 AD, a time period that Bankhead says corresponds nicely with the Romans in northern Britain. He believes that the site may represent a small port, wharf, bridge, or landing area where seafaring vessels once came to unload their cargo into smaller boats. With evidence suggesting that it was occupied as far back as 2,000 years ago, its importance cannot be overstated in Bankhead's words. The discoveries came following 40 years of excavation work, which was carried out with help from the local community. If you found ancient coins during an outdoor walk, would you report the discovery to the government, or would you say finders keepers and consider them your property? Let me know in the comments below. But first, be sure to hit that subscribe button. Number 5. Stolen Supercar. Considered one of the best performance cars of all time, the Acura NSX went down in history as the first everyday supercar. It was also the first ever mass-produced supercar with an entirely aluminum body and has a loyal cult following since it first rolled off the assembly line more than 30 years ago. The NSX first production run lasted from 1991 to 2005, and its value has only increased in recent years, making it an appealing find for both serious collectors and more casual car enthusiasts. During a search for a missing person in 2019, a 1991 NSX was found in North Carolina's Yadkin River. The vehicle had been reported stolen 16 years earlier in 2003, and it would spend 4 more years languishing at an impound lot until it was finally put up for sale in early 2023. After sitting in a river for so long, the car was in rough shape. It was filled with debris, covered in dirt, and appeared to be partially crushed. But it only had 32,000 miles on it, and being a much coveted NSX, had no problem attracting a buyer. The car was put up for auction starting at $6,000. After a short bidding war, the owners of a car shop in Owings Mills, Maryland, that specializes in restoring NSXs placed the winning offer at $8,500. It's unclear whether it's possible to restore the car to a drivable state, but the buyer is optimistic. He told The Drive that it's not the first salvaged NSX that has fallen into the business's hands, and he owns 3 of the cars, which certainly makes him qualified to pull the project off. The owner is also hoping to receive some sponsorship from Acura, given the car's historic value. Have you ever unexpectedly discovered something valuable in an unlikely place? Tell me about it in the comments below. Number 4. Medieval Shipwreck. More than 600 years ago, a flat-bottomed medieval trading ship was deliberately sunk in the Ijssel River in what is now the Netherlands. The wooden vessel, known as a cog, was most likely scuttled in an effort to alter the river's flow. At the time, much of northern and central Europe's rivers and seas were dominated by a powerful confederation of merchant guilds and market towns called the Hanseatic League. As an offshoot of the Rhine River, which flows through 6 countries, the Ijssel River was one of the waterways that the Hanseatic League used for ferrying cargo to and from various destinations. The sunken ship was discovered in 2012 during a project to widen the river, where it was found laying perpendicular to the water flow along with 2 other ancient boats. Over the next 3 years, a team of archaeologists worked painstakingly to recover the 55-ton vessel. Based on its sturdy design and construction, they speculated that it was used on international trade voyages. It was repurposed and sunk at a time when silt was building up heavily at the bottom of the river in hopes that its presence would help alleviate the problem to avoid disrupting ship traffic. Most of the interior was stripped before the ship was lowered into the river, but archaeologists did find some glazed tiles in the galley and an intact brick oven. Number 3. One of Maryland's oldest shipwrecks. While removing debris from Maryland's Nanticoke River during a bridge repair project in 2015, workers discovered visibly old ship timbers and proceeded to raise the intact keel, frames, and other parts of a 200-year-old ship. State archaeologists determined that the vessel was built with timber from oak trees that were felled along the Chesapeake coast, making it one of the oldest known Maryland-built shipwrecks. They believe it was most likely a merchant ship, measuring roughly 45 feet long, and it was probably built during the late 18th or early 19th century. At the time, the nearby town of Vienna was a bustling port town that served as an entry point for cargo that went all over the country. Following its discovery, experts said that they hoped it would teach them more about what daily life was like during the period. Archaeologists were perplexed that the boat wasn't discovered at an earlier point in time, including when the bridge it was found near was first built. If a barge hadn't crashed into the ship and caused it to need repairs, it's likely that the wreck wouldn't have been found. It's unclear what caused the vessel to wreck and if there are any plans to preserve it and put it on public display. Number 2. The USS Inaugural. Built in 1944, the USS Inaugural was a member of the highly successful Admiral class of American-made minesweepers. After clearing 82 mines and earning 2 battle stars for her service in the Pacific, she was decommissioned in 1946, shortly after the war's end. The 185-foot-long vessel spent the next 20 years mothballed among the U.S. Navy's Atlantic Reserve Fleet in Texas, before being struck from the Naval Register and sold to a private buyer in 1967. The Inaugural was towed to St. Louis the following year and opened as a floating museum. It was designated as a National Historic Landmark in 1986 as one of the only 2 surviving Admiral-class minesweepers. From April to October 1993, the Mississippi River and its tributaries experienced catastrophic overflowing, inundating vast swaths of the American Midwest with water. Known as the Great Flood of 1993, it was one of the most costly and devastating disasters of its kind in American history. The torrential waters ripped the Inaugural from its moorings near the Gateway Arch and tore a hole into its hull, causing it to rapidly take on water. It drifted downstream, turned over onto its side, and sank in the Missouri side of the river. The ship has remained there ever since, occasionally reappearing when the water level drops. It became visible in 2012, 2015, 2021, and 2022. Plans to salvage and restore the wreck were cancelled after it was deemed unfeasible, and there have been intermittent efforts to scrap it during times when it became accessible. It's clear just by looking at the Inaugural that it's in a state of irreversible decay and has unfortunately lost most of its historical value. Number 1. Civil War Cannons. In 2009, after searching for 20 years, researchers found 2 Civil War-era cannons in South Carolina's Great Pee River. They found a 3rd cannon in 2012, and in 2015, all 3 were raised from the water, with each weighing somewhere between 10,000 and 15,000 pounds. 2 of the weapons, identified as Confederate Brooke rifle cannons, measured roughly 12 feet long each. The 3rd was a 9-foot-long Union Dahlgren cannon. They were all dumped off the Confederate battleship CSS PD after commanders became worried that Union forces might seize the ship. The PD was set on fire, and the cannons were lost until their rediscovery near the city of Florence 150 years later. Archaeologists said that the cannons were in excellent condition for their age and for the conditions they sat in for a century and a half. At the time of their recovery, officials announced plans to preserve them and hand them over to the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs for display outside a VA building in Florence. Thanks for watching. Which one of these discoveries shocked you the most? Tell us in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time. Subscribe.